The founder's table was 3 steps away from me when my son put his hand on the back of the chair and stopped me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong room. "Mom," Nathan said, low enough that only the closest guests could hear, but smiling wide enough that the ones who couldn't hear would think he was being sweet. "The founder's table is for important people tonight. Let me get someone to walk you to your seat." I was still holding my glass of champagne. I remember the little chill of it against my fingers, and the way the ballroom lights turned the ice sculpture behind him into something that looked like it was crying. 200 people in that room. Investors, the board, a photographer moving between tables like a hummingbird, and my own boy, 38 years old in a tuxedo I'd paid for the first time he ever needed one, telling me I didn't belong at the table I had built. The table with the little brass plate that said, "Founders." I had built that company on the kitchen counter of a rented duplex in Dallas, back when Nathan was 9 and slept with the light on. I signed the first contract with a ballpoint pen that had gone dry halfway through my own name, so I finished it in a second color, and I kept that contract in my bag for 30 years the way some people keep a wedding ring after the marriage ends. It was in my bag that night, too. I didn't fully know why I'd brought it. I'd told myself it was sentimental. Now I think some quiet part of me already knew what the evening was going to ask of me. My name is Georgia Whitman, and for most of my life, my answer to being pushed aside was to stay small and keep the peace, because I believed that was what a good mother did. I believed if I just kept building, kept giving, kept swallowing the little insults, my children would look up one day and see me. That night, standing 3 steps from a chair with my name nowhere near it, I understood that day was never going to come on its own. If you've ever poured everything you had into people who somehow forgot you were the one holding the whole thing up, stay with me, because this is a story for you. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if real stories about real people are what you come here for. There are more of them, and they don't let go of you easily. So there I was, glass sweating in my hand, my son's palm still resting on that chair like he owned it. 200 faces starting to turn toward the small, strange stillness at the front of the room. And I had a choice to make that I'd been avoiding for far too long. I could have made a scene. Part of me wanted to, the same part that had spent years wanting to, and never once doing it. Instead, I did what I had always done, which was smooth the moment over so nobody else had to feel uncomfortable. I lowered my glass. I patted Nathan's arm like his little slight was a joke between us, and I said, "Of course, honey. Wouldn't want to be in the way." A young woman in a headset appeared at my elbow the way staff does at those events, materializing out of nowhere to manage a problem, and she walked me toward a round table near the back, close enough to the kitchen doors that I could feel the warm gust every time a waiter pushed through. She pulled out my chair. She was kind about it, that girl. She had no idea she was seating the founder of the company at the folding chair edge of its own celebration. "Can I bring you anything, ma'am?" she asked, and I told her no. Thank you. I was fine, because that was the other thing I always said. I was fine. I had been fine through a great many things that were not fine at all. From back there, I had a clear view of the founder's table and of Nathan settling into the center seat like it had been carved for him. The brass plate caught the light. Around him sat the people he wanted to be seen with, the venture partners and the 2 board members he'd grown close to, all of them laughing at something he'd said. He had my late husband's easy shoulders and my own stubborn jaw, and watching him hold that table, I felt a strange doubled thing, pride and grief at once, the way you feel when you see how tall a tree has grown over a fence line, and remember you're the one who planted it in the wrong spot. Because I did plant it. I want you to understand that. Not as a boast, but because it matters to everything that came after. 30 years back, I sat at a kitchen counter in a rented duplex off Greenville Avenue with a legal pad, a pot of coffee, and a 9-year-old asleep down the hall who kept a lamp on because the dark scared him. Their father was gone by then, not dead yet, but gone in the ways that count, and I had exactly enough money to make it 4 more months. I had an idea for a company that moved medical supplies faster and cheaper to rural clinics, the kind that were always running out of the boring things that keep people alive, and I had the nerve to think I could build it, which back then felt less like nerve and more like the only door in a room with no windows. I signed our first real contract at that same counter. The pen died halfway through my signature, right in the middle of my own name, so I dug a red one out of Nathan's homework box and finished it in a color that didn't match. Georgia in blue, Whitman in red. I laughed out loud, alone at 11 at night, because it looked ridiculous and because it was real. I folded that contract and kept it. 30 years later, it was in the beaded evening bag on my lap, soft as cloth from all the folding, and I sat there in the back of the ballroom running my thumb over the worn crease of it while my son held court at the table it had paid for. A voice pulled me back. Georgia Whitman, is that you back here?" It was Harold Feenan, one of the earliest investors, a rangy old man with a cattleman's face who'd put money into the company when it was still mostly my handwriting and a promise. He'd flown in for the gala, and now he was standing over my little table looking genuinely confused, holding a plate of the good shrimp. "Harold," I said, and I stood to hug him, and for the length of that hug I felt like myself again. "What in the world are you doing seated back by the kitchen?" He looked toward the front, then back at me, and I watched him start to do the math. "They've got you at the founder's table, surely." "There was a mix-up with the seating," I said, and I gave him the easy smile, the one I could put on like a coat. "It's fine. I can see everything from here." Nathan noticed. He had a radar for the room that I'd always admired, a sense for where attention was gathering, and he came over quick and smooth, with his hand already out. "Mr. Feenan, so glad you made it. I see you found my mother. She insisted on hanging back tonight. She gets shy at these things now." He said it warmly, an arm going around my shoulders, and it was such a small, clean lie that I almost admired the craft of it. Shy. I had cold-called hospital administrators for 2 years straight. I had talked a bank out of foreclosing on us in a meeting where my hands shook so hard I sat on them. Harold looked at me. Just a beat too long. He was old enough to have seen a lot of tables and known who really built the things people sat around, and something crossed his face, a flicker, before good manners closed over it. "Well," he said slowly, "your mother's not the shy type I remember." "People change," Nathan said, smiling, steering him back toward the front. "Let me introduce you to the team." And just like that, I was alone again at the back table, and the girl in the headset came by to ask if I wanted the chicken or the fish. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't rage, not yet. It was smaller and older than rage. It was the tired ache of a woman who has spent decades making herself easy to overlook, and is only now, too late, noticing that everyone took her up on the offer. I had taught Nathan to walk in the aisles of a warehouse I couldn't afford to heat. I had signed him onto the payroll at 22 when he had a business degree and no idea which end of a loading dock was which, and I had watched with a full heart as he got good, really good, better at the shine of the thing than I ever was. Somewhere along the way, I had started letting him speak for the company, then speak as the company, and I'd told myself that was what handing something down was supposed to look like. What I hadn't told anyone, not Harold, not the board, not Nathan, was what I'd quietly arranged 3 weeks earlier in a lawyer's office on the 14th floor of a building downtown. I hadn't planned to use it. I'd told myself it was just insurance, the kind you buy and pray you never need. But sitting there with the chicken or the fish, and my whole life folded soft in my lap, I felt the shape of it in the room like a held breath, and I wondered how much longer I could keep pretending I didn't have it. The lights dimmed for the program, and a screen came down behind the founder's table. There was a video, the kind every growing company makes once it has enough money to hire people who make videos. All sweeping shots of warehouses and clinics and grateful nurses, scored with a piano that swelled at the right moments. I watched it from the back with my hands folded, waiting for the part I knew was coming, the origin story, because every one of these things has an origin story. It came at the 90-second mark. A warm narrator's voice said that the company had begun with a bold vision and a relentless drive to serve the communities others ignored. And the screen showed a photo of Nathan at maybe 24, sleeves rolled up, pointing at a whiteboard. Nathan at the founding. Except Nathan hadn't been at the founding. Nathan had been in the 10th grade at the founding, failing geometry and lying to me about it. The kitchen counter wasn't in the video. The duplex wasn't in the video. I wasn't in the video. Not once. Not a single frame, and I sat there in the dark watching a company erase the woman who dreamed it, while that same woman ate a plate of catering chicken 40 feet away. I need to back up and tell you how a thing like that happens, because it doesn't happen all at once. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to write their mother out of her own life. It happens the way water shapes a rock, one small pass at a time. So slow you don't see the stone changing until one day the whole shape of it is different. When Nathan came into the business, I was so happy I could have cried. My boy, the one who slept with the lamp on, wanting to build the thing beside me. I gave him room the way you give a young tree room, and he grew fast. He was charming in ways I never was. Buyers liked him. Reporters liked him. When a trade magazine wanted a photo for a profile, it made sense to send the handsome young executive instead of the tired woman in sensible shoes. And I told myself that was strategy, not surrender. When a conference wanted a keynote, it made sense for him to give it, and I sat in the audience and clapped so hard my palms stung. I kept telling myself I was building him a stage. I didn't understand. Not for years, that a stage built for someone else is a stage you've agreed to stand off of. The screen went dark, the lights came up, and Nathan stood at the founder's table with a microphone, and the room turned to him with that soft hush a crowd gives a man they've decided to admire. 30 years ago, he began, someone had a crazy idea in a little rented place in this city. My heart lifted, actually lifted, because for one foolish second I thought he was going to say my name. That idea became this, and I've spent my whole career making sure it became something worthy of the people who depend on us. He talked about the future, about a new round of funding, about modernizing our leadership for the decade ahead, and the room nodded along. And somewhere in there, the crazy idea in the little rented place quietly lost its author. It just became a thing that had happened, the way weather happens, with no one standing behind it. He never said the word mother. He never said Georgia. He raised a glass to the team that built this, and 200 people drank to it. And I lifted my water glass an inch off the tablecloth and set it back down without drinking, because I could not make my hand do it. That was when the folder came. A man I half recognized from the finance side slid into the empty chair beside me during the applause, quiet and apologetic, the way people move when they've been sent to do something they'd rather not. He had a leather folder and a nice pen, the good kind, the kind that never dies in the middle of your name. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, keeping his voice under the noise. "Nathan asked me to catch you tonight while everyone's together. Just some housekeeping on the restructuring. Nothing urgent, but he'd love to have it wrapped before the funding announcement Monday." He opened the folder. I didn't need to read every line to understand it, though I read every line anyway, slowly, the way you read something you already know is going to hurt. It was a consent, drawn up clean and formal, agreeing to a reorganization of the company's share structure, dressed in the soft language of these things, simplifying the cap table, consolidating decision-making, aligning governance with operational leadership. What it did, underneath all that padding, was move the votes. It quietly gathered the real say-so of the company into Nathan's hands and asked me to sign away the last of mine, and it had a little tab with a red arrow pointing at the line where my name was supposed to go. Sign here, in the middle of my own name, more or less. He figured tonight would be a nice time, the man said, and he had the decency to look embarrassed. Celebrate the new chapter. I looked across the room at my son, laughing, glass in hand, the brass plate glinting at his elbow, and I understood that the seating hadn't been a mix-up at all. You don't put the founder by the kitchen doors by accident on the same night you send a man with a folder to close her out. The back table was the point. Make her small in the room, make her feel like a guest at her own life, and then the paper feels like a formality instead of a theft. He'd planned the whole choreography of my disappearing, and the awful part, the part that sat in my chest like a stone, was how well he knew me. He was betting I'd sign. He'd built his whole night on the fact that his mother always kept the peace. And here is the thing he didn't know, the thing I'd been holding since that lawyer's office 3 weeks before. Because I want you to feel the ground it stood on. When I'd handed shares to Nathan over the years, and to a trust, and to a handful of early people, I'd never once let go of the piece that mattered. Not out of some grand suspicion. Out of a stubbornness I couldn't even explain to myself at the time, a refusal to sign the last of it away that I'd chalked up to sentiment. The restructuring in that folder only worked if I gave it the final vote it was missing. Without my signature, it was just expensive paper. With it, my son became untouchable, and I became a nice old story in a company video. I clicked the man's beautiful pen open. I watched Nathan across the room, and for the first time in 30 years, sitting by the warm gust of the kitchen doors with my whole life folded in my lap, I let myself feel how tired I was of being easy to overlook. I didn't sign it. I also didn't say no. I did the thing I'd gotten so good at that I could do it in my sleep, which was buy time and keep everyone comfortable. Let me read it properly, I told the man. Away from all this noise. I'll get it to Nathan. He hesitated, because his instructions had surely been to come back with a signature. But there's only so hard a person can push a gray-haired woman at a party without looking like exactly what he is. He clicked his lovely pen shut, left the folder with me, and slipped back into the crowd. And I sat there holding 2 folded documents now, 30 years apart. My first contract in blue and red. My last one waiting for me to disappear into it. While I sat with them, I let myself go back to the year I almost lost everything, because that year explains why my hand wouldn't move. Nathan was in college. The company was maybe 6 years old and drowning quietly the way small companies do, all revenue on paper and no cash in the account. A bigger competitor offered to buy us, and the number they put in front of me would have set me up for life, would have paid off the duplex I'd finally bought, would have let me sleep. Everyone told me to take it. Harold told me to take it. And I sat with that offer at the same kitchen counter and I said no, because taking it meant the clinics we served in the towns nobody else would drive to would get folded into a machine that didn't care whether they lived. And I had promised those places, actual people with actual names, that we'd keep showing up. So I kept the company and I kept the promise, and I refinanced my house to make payroll, and I did not tell my son how close we came, because I didn't want him to be afraid the way I'd spent my whole childhood being afraid. I gave up the money so the thing would keep its soul. And now the boy I'd protected from that fear was seated under a brass plate, toasting a version of the story where the soul was his idea. Georgia. Harold again. He'd wandered back, and this time he didn't sit. He crouched down beside my chair the way you do when you want to talk to someone without the whole room reading your face. His eyes had gone sharp under the party manners. "That fella brought you paper," he said. It wasn't a question. He'd seen the folder from across the room. "I've been in a lot of deals, Georgia. I know what it looks like when they send the quiet one over with a folder during the speeches so the guest of honor doesn't have time to think." He glanced toward Nathan, then back at me, and lowered his voice further. "You built this on a promise to those clinics. I put my money in because of that promise, not because of him. What's he asking you to sign?" And there it was. The moment I could keep the peace one more time or stop. I could tell Harold it was nothing, housekeeping, and finish the evening as the shy old mother in the back, and drive home and read the folder at my kitchen table, and probably, God help me, sign it, because that was who I'd trained myself to be. Or I could say the true thing out loud to another human being for the first time. "He's asking me," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, "to sign away my control of the company, to make what happened here tonight official. Found her by the kitchen door. On paper, forever." Harold went very still. "And do you have control to sign away?" "I never let it go, Harold." I felt the words land in my own chest as I said them. Everybody thinks I handed it all down. I gave Nathan the title, the stage, the spotlight, all of it. But the last vote that decides where this company goes has been mine the whole time. I just never made anyone look at it. Something moved through the old man's face that I can only call relief, and under it, a slow burning anger on my behalf that I hadn't felt from anyone in years. "Then you understand," he said, "that he's not asking you for a favor tonight. He's asking you to hand a stranger the keys to a house you built and pretend you were only ever a guest in it." Up at the front, Nathan's laugh rang out over the tables. He was walking Harold's empty seat with his eyes now, noticing his investor had gone missing, noticing where he'd gone. I watched my son clock the two of us in the back, the old money man crouched down beside the mother he'd tucked away, and I watched the smile stay on his face while something cooler moved into his eyes. He excused himself from his group and started toward us, unhurried, a man confident that whatever small fire had started in the back of his party, he could put it out with charm, the way he put out everything. "Everything all right back here?" he said, arriving with that warmth turned all the way up. "Harold, I've got the head of the fund dying to meet you." "Mom, did Peterson find you?" "Just some paperwork. Nothing you need to trouble yourself reading tonight. We can sort it Monday." He put his hand on my shoulder again, the same hand from the beginning of the night, the one that had stopped me 3 steps from my own table. "You look tired. Do you want me to call you a car home?" "Send her home. Get the folder signed. Announce the funding. Erase her cleanly and kindly, with a car and a kind word, so that no one, least of all his mother, ever has to feel the sharp edge of what's being done." I looked up at my son, at the jaw he got from me and the shoulders he got from his father, and I thought about the lamp he slept with as a boy, and the clinics in the towns with no doctors, and the pen that died in the middle of my name 30 years ago. I thought about every time I'd made myself small so that the people I loved wouldn't have to feel the weight of what I carried. I had spent a lifetime believing that love meant disappearing, and I finally understood at 71 years old, by the warm gust of a kitchen door, that a mother who erases herself teaches her children she was never really there. "No," I said. Nathan blinked. "No?" "No, I don't want a car." I set my beaded bag on the table and I stood up, slow, so that the standing meant something. "And no, I'm not signing your paper. I think I'll say a few words instead." I picked up the leather folder in one hand and, without quite deciding to, my old blue and red contract in the other. "You mentioned modernizing the leadership, honey. I'd like to help you introduce it." And I started walking toward the founder's table. People notice when a woman who's been put in the back starts walking to the front. Conversations trailed off table by table as I passed, that ripple a room makes when it senses something is about to happen that wasn't on the program. Nathan came after me fast, his voice low and urgent now, the warmth cracking at the edges. Mom, this isn't the time. Whatever you think you need to say, we'll say it later, privately." He reached for my elbow. I kept walking. There's a particular freedom in no longer being afraid of embarrassing yourself, and I had just found it, 3 steps from where he'd first stopped me. I reached the founder's table. The venture partners looked up. The 2 board members Nathan had cozied up to shifted in their seats, and there on the table, catching the light, was a microphone stand, the one he'd used for his speech, still warm from his hands. I picked up the microphone. It gave that small electric thump they give when a live one changes grip, and the whole room heard it, and the whole room went quiet. "Good evening," I said. "For those of you I haven't met, my name is Georgia Whitman." I let that sit for a second. Not a dramatic pause for effect, just long enough for the name to find the few people in that room old enough or curious enough to have wondered about it. I saw a woman at the second table lean toward her husband and whisper, and I saw him nod slowly. 30 years ago, I signed this company's first contract at a kitchen counter in a rented duplex off Greenville Avenue. My pen ran out of ink halfway through my own name, so I finished it in red, because I only had my son's homework pen, and my son was 9, and he was asleep down the hall with the light on because the dark scared him. I held up the soft, folded contract so the tables near the front could see it. Blue and red, worn to cloth. "I've kept this in my purse for 30 years. I brought it tonight and I didn't know why. I think I do now." Nathan had gone the color of the tablecloth. "Mom, he said, off microphone, pleading and warning at once. Please. You'll want to hear this part, sweetheart, I told him, and I turned back to the room. A few minutes ago, a very polite man brought me a folder during my son's lovely speech. It asks me to sign away my vote in this company, to consolidate leadership, to modernize governance. I set the leather folder down on the founder's table next to the brass plate, and I laid my open hand flat on top of it. It's a good piece of writing, clean, kind, even. It's built on one assumption, and I want to tell you what that assumption is, because it's the truest thing anyone said all night. It assumes that I'll disappear quietly, because I always have. I looked at the venture partners. I looked at the head of the fund who had put down his drink. So before this company announces a new round of funding on Monday, the people writing those checks should know exactly what they're buying and from whom. When I brought my son into this business, I gave him the title of chief executive. I gave him the podium, the profiles, the keynotes, the photograph on the screen tonight. I gave those things gladly because I'm his mother and I wanted the world to love him the way I do. But there is one thing I never signed over to anyone, not to Nathan, not to a trust, not to the board. The controlling vote of this company has been mine, and only mine, from that kitchen counter to this microphone. Every decision made in this building happens because I allow it to, including tonight's. You could have heard a fork drop. Harold, back near my empty table, was on his feet now, and he was smiling like a man watching the weather finally break after a long, dry summer. Which means, I went on, gentler now, because I wasn't there to destroy my son. I was there to stop being erased by him. The restructuring in this folder cannot happen without my signature, and I am not going to sign it. What's going to happen instead is this. This company will keep its promise to the clinics in the towns nobody else will drive to. The promise I nearly lost everything to keep, long before some of you had heard our name. Our leadership will be modernized, Nathan, since you raised it. It's going to start remembering who founded it. I set the microphone down. That was all. No thunder, no curse, no grand ruin. Just a woman standing at a table with her name on a brass plate she'd earned 3 decades before anyone thought to engrave it. But the room had already done the math I'd spent 30 years keeping it from doing. The head of the fund was leaning across to one of the board members, murmuring, his eyebrows up. The 2 board members Nathan had courted were suddenly very interested in their own hands, and Nathan stood there in the center of his own gala, in the tuxedo I'd bought him a lifetime of tuxedos ago, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was small and had been caught in a lie he'd been sure would hold. Underneath the shock, if I'm honest, there was something almost like a boy who'd been waiting a long time for his mother to finally stand up, and hated that she had, and needed it all the same. "Why?" he said, and for once the microphone wasn't near enough to carry it, so it was just for me. "Why did you never say anything? All these years?" And that question, was the one that undid me a little, because it was the real one, the one under all the paper and the seating and the speeches. Why does a woman spend her life making herself small for the very people who then can't see her? Why do we teach the ones we love that our disappearing is a kind of gift? Because I thought love meant never being in the way, I told him. I was wrong. I was in the way tonight on purpose, and I've never felt more like your mother. The gala went on around us because galas do. Waiters kept moving. Somewhere a glass was refilled, but the founder's table had gone quiet in a permanent kind of way. the quiet of a story that everyone in the room now knew they'd tell for years. The night the woman by the kitchen door turned out to be the one holding the whole building up. Harold was crossing the floor toward me. The head of the fund was rising from his chair, buttoning his jacket, coming to shake the hand of the person he'd apparently misunderstood who ran things. And Nathan was still standing in the center of it all, my son, 38 years old, watching his mother be seen by 200 people for the first time in his adult life. And I realized I had no idea yet whether what I'd just done had ended us or finally, painfully, begun something honest between us. I didn't know which way it would fall, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was going to stay and find out, instead of quietly going home. I did stay. Harold reached me first and put his weathered hand over mine, and he didn't say anything clever. He just held on for a moment the way old friends do when words would only get in the way. Then the head of the fund was there, buttoning his jacket, saying it was an honor, actually an honor, to meet the person who'd kept the promise he'd been hearing about for years and had started to think was a legend. Board members drifted over one at a time, careful, the way people move towards someone whose true size they've just misjudged. And through all of it, Nathan stood at the edge of his own gala, not fleeing, not fighting, just watching his mother be seen. Someone, I never found out who, quietly pulled out the chair at the founder's table. The center chair, the one with the brass plate, and a young woman in a headset. Maybe the same girl who'd walked me to the back an hour before, caught my eye across the room and gave me the smallest nod, like she'd been waiting all night for the seating to finally make sense. I didn't take the center chair. I pulled out the one beside it instead, and I looked at my son and I said, "Sit down, Nathan." Not cold, not soft either. Just true. He sat. For a while, neither of us said much. Two people who'd spent 30 years talking around the one thing that mattered, learning how to be quiet in the same space without one of us disappearing. His hands were shaking a little. So were mine. Under the table, at some point, I'm not even sure who reached first, his fingers found mine, the way they used to when he was small, and the parking lot was dark, and he wasn't sure I'd wait for him at the door. I waited. I always waited. He just hadn't looked back to see it in a long, long time. "I don't know how to fix this," he finally said. "I don't either," I told him, "but we're going to do it in the same room. That's new. That's enough for tonight." The weeks after weren't a fairy tale, and I won't pretend they were. There was a lot to untangle, a lot of quiet meetings, a lot of my son having to learn who I'd been the whole time he thought he was carrying the company alone. But a month later, I drove out to one of those clinics, a low brick building in a town so small, the highway forgets to slow down for it. The kind of place I'd once refinanced my house to keep serving. A nurse there, gray now, remembered me from 20 years back. She took both my hands and told me a boy had come in that morning who wouldn't have made it to a city hospital in time, and that the supplies had been on the shelf because we'd kept showing up. That's the whole thing, in the end. That's what the founder's table was ever for. Not the brass plate, not the champagne, not who gets to sit where while the photographer circles. It was for the promise to the towns nobody else would drive to, and for the girl at a kitchen counter who finished her own name in red ink because she refused to stop halfway. I'm 71 years old. I built a company from a rented duplex off Greenville Avenue, and I nearly let it, and myself, be folded away into a nice story told by someone else. I want you to hear me, Whoever you are, wherever you're listening from tonight, no title, no fortune, no seat of honor gives anyone the right to erase the woman who cleared the road they're standing on. If you are that woman, if you've spent years making yourself small so the people you love wouldn't feel your weight, I need you to know it is never too late to pick up the microphone. You do not have to be loud. You only have to stop disappearing. Nathan and I still don't know exactly what we are to each other now. We're finding out slowly over coffee that goes cold while we actually talk. The two of us learning a language we should have learned decades ago. There's a lot I haven't told him yet about those early years, about the nights I sat up with a legal pad and a scared little boy asleep down the hall, about the day I said no to the money and yes to the promise, about a phone call I got, not long after that gala, from someone I never expected to hear from again. But that, my friends, is a story for another evening. Stay close. I'll tell you soon.